All right. And Discussions of Truth, Ian Trottier coming at you Wednesday, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. For most of this year, 2020, I have begun program earlier, at times having 4 guests in the session. Um, Today I'm keeping it simple, and I'm going with one guest. That'll be Ken LaCorte, former Fox News executive. He'll be joining us here in about a little over 10 minutes. I'll take a moment and have you listen to the lyrics of this song by a group called Highly Suspect. Of course, I open up my programs with Seek and Destroy by Metallica. That's a song from the 80s, I believe. The Highly Suspect in 2016 came out with a song that's perhaps a little more pertinent to our time. Sorry for the feedback there. Let's get into My Name is Human, just briefly. Just let it develop a little bit. What's happening in the world right now? I'm going to stop it there. And sorry for the feedback. I am in studio. It's simply the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth interruption. It will pass. I apologize for it. Okay, so what I direct you to now. I'll try to cut this. I apologize. What I direct you to now is a lead economist globally, educated at Wharton, studied Mandarin at Yale. My understanding is that she was an economic advisor in the White House in the 80s. Catherine Austin Fitts. So let's briefly go there, because I think it incredibly prudent to hear her words. Catherine Austin Fitts talking about we are watching the mother of all debt entrapments. Here we go. Hold on a moment. Didn't have this queued. Here we go. And roll.
What we're seeing is a re-engineering of the global financial system and governance system on the just do it method. And of course, a very important part of that is we see a lot of smart money get out of the market in the top in January and February, and then March, a push used to basically use police powers created through the healthcare system to shut down a huge part of the independent economy globally. So small business, small farms shut down across the board, throwing both the emerging markets and many small business into debt traps. So we are watching the mother of all debt entrapments going on globally, and that means we're in for very radical reengineering. And of course, that's what we're seeing in the US. I mean, it's very interesting. If you come into Tulare, we have a tracker where we're tracking the COVID deaths by state and party affiliations of the governors and mayors. And one of the things you can see, you have 37 Fed locations of banks and branches across the country. Guess how many of them had violent protests?
Okay, I'm not going to give chance for the interviewer to respond to that because he simply is a little in over his head when speaking to Catherine on this. But the answer to that is all of them. And as the interview goes on, again, you can find the interview on YouTube, Catherine Austin Fitts. Just find her Mother of All Entrapments. Catherine Austin Fitts, Mother of All Entrapments will get you to that video. What you're seeing there is the question was led to, are you saying that the Federal Reserve is behind this? And her answer to that was yes, whether directly or indirectly. This isn't an American issue. This isn't a Chinese issue. Trump is pointing fingers lately. I think one of the reports I heard is that he's pointing fingers at the Chinese. This goes much deeper than that. You have to look at the system that the Chinese have inherited. Go back to World War I, go back to the setup of that, and then they go back into World War II. This is developing at such a rapid rate. The Rockefeller Foundation, for instance, J.D. Rockefeller, he basically built the Peking Medical College with his own financing. University of Chicago, large part financed by him as well. So if you draw a parallel, you look at Bill Gates. What's Bill Gates doing concerned with world health? What was J.D. Rockefeller over 100 years ago doing investing in healthcare? He's an oil baron. Bill Gates is a computer engineer. Well, anybody that tells me that they simply are in it for humanity reasons, I don't buy that personally. They're in it from a business perspective, because J.D. Rockefeller is no longer alive, but his foundation continues. They're in it from a business perspective, and they're in it to make money. I apologize for the feedback. I have an iPhone tied into this. I believe it's the cables I'm using, and moving forward, I will do my best to squash this interference. I'll bring Ken LaCorte on the program here in about 7 minutes, and unfortunately, if I have this background interference, I'll have it. So I appreciate you. I appreciate you listening anyway. I started the program from scratch, basically getting close now to about 4 years ago in Wynwood in Miami. So totally self-financed, totally self-researched. And I simply do it because I realize the significance and the importance of the matter. And look, I started this because of the Zika epidemic and the debate happening in local government because of the Zika problem. And never would I have envisioned 2020 delivering what we're dealing with today. But here we are, and we're dealing with it. So, getting past the epidemic or pandemic angle of it, you have to get to the economic level of it. Unfortunately, inserted into U.S. society, even global society. Whether you're for the destruction of these monuments and statues or against it, I frankly think that history is important so that you can learn from it. There are plenty of African leaders, African American leaders that deserve statues that don't have statues. For that matter, there are plenty of Native Americans that deserve statues and don't have statues. Okay. I think have I solved the interference problem? I sure hope so. Again, it is that iPhone cable that I'm using. And that is the cable I will use in studio to feed into to bring Ken onto the program. Okay, so without that static, Catherine Austin Fitts. I just in a local city council that I'm close to. I took my opinion to that city council. And what you're dealing with right now is a mandatory mask ordinance. My personal opinion is I feel it should be voluntarily. Okay, because I see a parallel with the mandatory vaccine movement, and I frankly have an issue with the mandatory vaccine movement. Now, how that makes sense to me, and it may not make sense to you, but how it makes sense to me is the mandatory microchipping. Well, an implied mandatory microchipping movement, perhaps, right? So you look at ID 2020, again, funded by the Rockefeller Foundation and funded by the Gates Foundation. This is a digital tattoo, a tracking device. And essentially, the argument here by Catherine is that the US dollar is being overthrown, and the monetary currency, coins and paper, will shortly, whether that's in a month, 6 months, a year, 5 years, it will very soon, this is the plan, this is what's being unrolled, it will very soon become digitized. So we will be moving essentially from monetary exchange, tangible monetary exchange, to a digitized exchange on a global level. So if you go into Microsoft patent WO 2020-060606, you find that patent awarded to Microsoft, I believe back in February, to run a cryptocurrency system off of microchipped human beings. So that's why I see the mandatory mask movement being a precursor to what could likely and possibly become a mandatory microchipping movement across. We're not looking at the United States. The United States is being torn to shreds right now. Whether it survives as a country or not, that remains to be seen. There is a one world global order that is taking over, and it's doing so with a major push right now. My argument to you, folks, is do not be sidetracked by racial injustice movements. Look, nobody has an easy life. No one. We're all human beings. So regardless of color, regardless of history, regardless of race, the United States has built, in my view, in 2020, the most just platform for any language, any religion, any ethical background to live. That's been achieved. No other nation on the planet's been able to achieve that. The United States achieved it, and it's under attack and being destroyed. So before we bring on Ken, I urge you, if you're listening to this, I urge you to get past political divides, get past religious divides, get past ethical or racial divides. Unite under an understanding to disagree, inalienable human rights that are portrayed through the U.S. Constitution, and get into weaving out, gutting out the central banking system that manipulates the United States currently. Okay, Let's bring on Ken LaCorte. This is Ian Trottier. Thank you for tuning in. Discussions of Truth. Pardon the static that you experienced the first few moments of the show. I'm not endorsed by either one of these music bands, Metallica or Highly Suspect, nor have either one of those bands given me authorization to use their music. If either one of them do contact me and ask me to discontinue use, I will do so. But I do urge you to listen to both of those songs. First, Seek and Destroy, to seek out corruption and destroy it. That's why I open up. And I've been opening up with that song now for over 2 years. And look into the lyrics of My Name is Human by Highly Suspect, because that's essentially what's happening, is that you're having the interface which connects man to machine, is that gap is closing. I hope that makes sense to you. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Instagram. All of this is self-funded. Discussions of Truth. I've built this by myself. And if you feel the need, I urge you to do that. To donate, you can do that right at iantrottier.com, IENTROTTIER.com. Okay, Ken LaCorte, ladies and gentlemen.
Hi, this is Ken LaCorte. I can't come to the phone right now, so please leave a message.
Okay, didn't expect that. I just spoke to him this morning, so let me just let him know that I'm trying to bring him in, and so he knows to expect me and what number to expect me from. Okay. All right, so I've just shot out a quick message to Ken, and bring him on momentarily here. Again, he's the founder of LaCorte News. Ken LaCorte was a longtime executive at the Fox News channel, running its online division for a decade. In an attempt to bridge the political divide and bring readers to neutral ground, LaCorte left Fox News in 2016 and subsequently launched his own news site. In 2018, he recruited former NPR editorial director Michael Oreskes and former Fox News executive editor John Moody to launch LaCorte News, a digital news startup with the stated goal of restoring faith in media. In 2019, New York Times publication revealed that LaCorte was running politically opposite sites, Conservative Edition News and Liberal Edition News. LaCorte defended this action by saying its intent was aimed at directing viewers to the politically centralized LaCorte News. In 2019, Jane Mayer reported in The New Yorker that Fox News reporter Diana Falzone had a story on Donald Trump's affair with Stormy Daniels in 2016 and claimed that LaCorte deliberately suppressed its release as Rupert Murdoch wanted Trump to win, end quote. LaCorte claimed that Falzone's reporting failed to meet journalistic standards of verification. The controversial gossip blogger Nick Rich called LaCorte's account complete baloney, adding Fox News was culpable. They did their own catch and kill on the story to protect Trump. LaCorte graduated from Claremont McKenna College in 1987 and subsequently worked on various national and international campaigns, including presidential campaigns in Venezuela, Colombia, and Guatemala. In 1987, he challenged California law by publishing the state's Megan's Law list. Despite a warning from the state's attorney general, LaCorte hand-copied the state's high-risk sex offenders and published them online in 2004. California officially published the Megan's Law database on the internet. Let's give Ken another try here. Hopefully he's received my message. If not, we'll get into something else and try him in a little bit. Ken LaCorte, ladies and gentlemen, this is Ian Trottier for Discussions of Truth. Let's see if he's there.
Ken LaCorte.
Ken, Ian Trottier, welcome to Discussions of Truth. How are you today, sir?
I'm doing very well. Sorry I didn't pick up before. I saw the local number and I didn't think it was you for some reason.
That's fine. Are you in California?
I'm actually in Sausalito.
You're in Sausalito. That's a nice area. How's the view today? How's the sky?
You know, it's actually kind of nice. You know, it woke up with a little muckiness, but that's one of the nice things about Sausalito. It never gets too hot up here. And are you up here as well, or I see a 415?
No, I'm actually based in Miami, but I've been out of Miami now for a number of months. I'm up in the Northwest.
Got it. Now you're breaking up a lot. Am I sounding okay to you? Is this going to work?
You sound great to me.
Okay.
Yeah, you sound fine to me. Let's wing it and go from where we can go.
Okay. What kind of length are we looking at, and what topics do you want to chat about?
Well, so I'd like to get into, of course, the state of media in the U.S., if you will, and if we can run it about 30 minutes, that'd be great.
Okay, whatever you want. That'd be fine.
So, for listeners, Ken, and I've given a brief introduction to you and what you've done with your career. Why don't you introduce yourself officially?
Dude, you know what? I'm barely hearing you. This may not work as well. Sounds. Try one more time. I don't know if there's. It sounds like it's a cell thing mixed up, but let's do what we can here.
Okay, we can try this as well. Is that any better, Ken?
Yeah, that's a good 40-50% better, easy.
Okay, excellent. And I can try one other thing if this continues the problem. So
no, you know what? This has been fine so far.
This is fine. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. How long did you say you want to chat for?
Yeah. So let's give it about 30 minutes if we can.
Okay, great. Look, instead of introducing me as LaCorte News, we just launched a new project here called the Media Action Network. It's less news and it's kind of more action against it. I'm basically kind of pushing back at the left-wing media on it. So that'd be a better introduction instead of LaCorte News. That's cool.
Excellent. That's wonderful. Explain to listeners, in your view, Ken, what's happening. Why in mass media in the U.S.? Why is this term fake news thrown around so commonly now?
Sure. Are we ready to go now? Is this good?
Yep.
Okay, great. Look, so what we saw is over the last handful of years that the news media really got a lot more partisan. This wasn't just a post-Trump thing. It was actually predated Trump by a good 3 or 4 years. I think it had a lot to do with the internet that made every single story that you were writing and putting online had to be clickbait, had to find its audience. Whereas when you had the LA Times before, or if you had NBC News, you basically had a license to make money, and there was no way you could lose. You didn't have to try that hard, and so all the products looked, they might have been liberal or a few were conservative, but they didn't have to push that hard. Well, what we saw in the last handful of years is that as those became more partisan. The national news media lineup is, it's probably a good 85-90% Democratic and 10% Republican. Republicans have Fox News, a couple other little small cable stations that nobody's heard of. They've got some radio and a few websites. And President Trump, Donald Trump was the first one that kind of figured out and had kind of the guts to fight back and say, you know what? These guys are not now referees anymore. They're players, and they're players on the opposing side. Now, Republicans kind of always knew that. I used to work in Republican campaigns many years ago, and they'd look at your stuff like it was the Zapruder film, and they'd analyze every word and look at it 3 ways till Sunday, and then your Democratic opponent would send something out, and they basically reprint the whole thing because they agreed with him. So Trump decided to fight back, and he did it very effectively. And in his Trumpian way, he did it ham-handed. He made up names. He called it fake news, and that's a really interesting term because it means 2 different things to 2 halves of the country. The media immediately freaked out and said, "We're not fake. We're telling the truth here. Everything we say is true," and that was kind of true. But you can tell truth you can tell lies by telling the truth. You know, I can say, hey, Pete Buttigieg gave a speech when he was wearing his underwear and socks. And if I don't go on and say, oh, and he was also wearing shoes and a shirt and a suit, the thing that I said was absolutely true. And this is how the media plays every day, primarily against Republicans. Is you can send a reporter to a Trump rally. Now, the Fox News reporter is going to find a nice family there, and they're going to find out people saying, wow, here's what I learned about the president, here's this, and they could present a very good picture of that. Whereas CNN is going to send a reporter, and they're going to be like, look, find a Nazi. There's 30,000 people with no masks out there. Find somebody with a short haircut who's a racist or a Nazi, and that's going to be our story. And so you could literally have two reporters come back from the same event that have diametrically opposed versions of reality, yet every one of them used truth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, it does, Ken. Why is it that we arrive? How did we arrive there as Americans? With the cornerstone of freedom of press. How was it that that media became politicized?
Again, I really think it had to do a lot with the internet, not exclusively, but it was what economic forces were behind this. Again, think of the late 1800s, early 1900s, when we studied about yellow journalism.
Yeah.
And what was going on out there? Well, you usually had a 14-year-old boy screaming out the most salacious headline that their headline writers could come up with that day from the world or the globe. And whoever had the most salacious headlines, they made the most pennies.
Okay. Yep.
And then the world kind of changed. We as people moved out to the suburbs, you subscribed to the New York Times, not one-off as some kid screaming, but you got a monthly subscription to it. Or then we flash forward to the 40s and 50s. The news was basically a loss leader on CBS, ABC, NBC. That was kind of their point of pride. So they didn't have to press hard to find an audience. I mean, they cared about winning, but only in the grand scheme. And everybody was making so much money. And the newspapers we grew up with. I mean, there aren't a whole lot of competitors to the LA Times, the New York Times, the Miami Herald. I mean, most of them had turned into one newspaper towns. So here comes the internet. Here comes Fox on cable. Here comes a lot of competition in the news space that they'd never had before. And what clicks online? I mean, look, when I ran FoxNews.com, we would put multiple headlines into a computer program. It would send out small samplings of those headlines to people around, and whichever one clicked the best, it would then serve that up to the other millions of people who would come across the site each day. Well, things like that, and driven towards clickbait, driven towards money, that encourages you to reach harder and to swing harder on those stories and on your bias sometimes, because you know who your audience is. So you had that coming into 2016, and then of course Donald Trump comes along and everybody lost their minds. And most liberal journalists, when they wake up in the morning, they view themselves as living in 1934 Germany, and they're the last things that stand between Trump, Hitler, and America. So you combine those two things, and we have this crap show that's going on in America right now.
So, and we can go various angles in this. Of course, we need to. I'd like to address the health pandemic. I think it's still a pandemic, certainly an epidemic. But let's backtrack. How does Stormy Daniels? How did that story figure into Trump being elected? And what were the shots that you called there at Fox News in regards to that?
So this was a story. So you got to put yourself. So Stormy Daniels presumably has an affair with the president, and she at one point said was trying to squeeze and extort some money out of him. Right? She was going around. But she had to kind of walk a fine line. So she was going to a handful of news outlets. It was Fox News. It was, oh man, I used to know. If I'd known, I would have brushed off my notes. This is 4 years ago. It was a couple other, liberal outlets, and she was basically wanted Trump to know that she was going to spill her story, but she couldn't spill her story, right? Because if she told the story, it'd get printed, and then everybody print it. She couldn't make her hush money. So what she was doing is she was reaching out to a couple outlets to be like, to let them then say, oh, hey, Trump campaign, we've got this stripper who says you had an affair with her, et cetera, et cetera. As she was having her lawyers reach out to him and say, hey, give us hush money to back this up. So Fox and a handful of other outlets had them approach us, but the problem is they just didn't give us. It was like so. Right. So this was maybe 2 weeks before the election. A lot of people were making a lot of accusations about the president. In fact, a lot of women were coming out and saying he groped me on a plane, he did untoward advances and whatnot. So kind of like on the scale of all the stuff that was coming out right then, Stormy Daniels, the fact that 20 years ago he might have slept with a stripper, that was, how do I say, it was kind of like not like a, oh my gosh, right, story compared to the others. So it was like, so she kind of had, so again, they wanted to tease it out so that Fox and others wouldn't report it, because again, if we reported it and they told us the information, she didn't make any dough. So they did that, and during the course of this, they implied that they were basically shaking down the candidate, and then they would show things like, oh, well, see, look, here's the document, and you look at a document, it's like, okay, well, it's all fake names, and nobody signed this. It's like, well, what do we get yet? She was refusing to talk to us. Another gal, her manager said, you can say it's true, but that's the only thing. I'm not saying any other word. So we at Fox were like, what do we have here? We've got a stripper who says that she had sex, but she's still publicly denying it. They've got her people are showing us documents that aren't signed and all sorts of things. So we just didn't have a story. And we weren't close to publishing that story. It was something that's no. And then in the midst of this, Stormy and her team went completely silent. Well, in retrospect, they went silent because they got the check.
Right.
And then she shut up. So, flash forward 2 years later, the reporter at Fox News who had this and was pushing it, and since gotten fired from Fox, was, when it kind of burbled out more, was like, see, I had it. Well, she didn't have anything. I mean, she had some, she had enough to be like, oh, this is interesting, let's look into it, but clearly not enough to print a story. And then there was all other sorts of creepy people involved. It was a site called The Dirty, and a guy, which is just a disgusting kind of like revenge porn site. Everybody had fake names, and Stormy Daniels, AKA. It was just kind of a weird thing. But of course, in retrospect, even though 4 or 5 publications had the same thing, including some liberal ones, the media was like, see, Fox News had this and didn't report it.
Right.
That's what the liberal media does.
So I lived in San Francisco for 8 years, and I've retained the number. That's why that area code popped up. Ken, why did you ultimately leave? Why did you ultimately leave Fox News and go out on your own?
So I left Fox News because I was pushed out. Look, I had been very tight with Roger Ailes since many years before he started Fox News. I'd worked with him. Literally, my first job in 1980. I'm dating myself a little bit here. 1987.
Wow.
Was working for Roger when I was as a grad student. So I'd been with him for a number of years. And when he got pushed out, they pushed out a handful of the other guys. Not for any reasons, and they did me well on the way out, so I didn't complain too much. So I left there and I said, okay, I see this media is going kind of out of control. Let's see if we can find that middle ground. I actually brought my old boss from Fox News. I brought in a guy who had run the news at NPR, Michael Oreskes, for a while, and we really said let's find this non-crazy middle ground. And 2 things happened. One is it's really hard to there's a reason why people don't have good news channels, or there's a reason why when you go to CNN, it's oh my God, Trump sucks, and you go to Fox News and it's oh my God, Trump's great, because
right.
Stuff that's kind of in the middle just has a hard time finding an audience.
Right.
And to tap it off on top of it, which was kind of was kind of pushed me out of it, is the New York Times and did a hit piece on it, making it look like I was making up fake news, and literally like compared me to Russian agents, and Facebook yanked me because the New York Times and others like told them weird stuff. So it was like if you weren't a liberal orthodoxy player in that, if you got any attention at all by the mainstream media, it was going to be to brand you as a right-wing Russian, and that's kind of what happened. So I'm doing some of that, but what I've recently launched is like I've just reported on this long enough, and I really think we are at a bad point in America because as the news agencies have kind of gotten more extreme, it's really loaded to one side. And I mean, look, the concept that Joe Biden in his basement is running a real campaign, and you know, he'd be at 30% in the polls if it wasn't for the entire national press corps, except for Fox and a couple others, basically being his press agents. And I think it's important for America to have a balance of that. And it's like I'm seeing the press misbehave more and more, still under the false notion of objectivity when they're not objective at all, and they literally have turned from, you know, referees to players. And so I'm taking this step with the Media Action Network, where we kind of expose them for what they are, where we protect some of their victims, and to help build up the right. And that's, you know, think of it as the kind of a conservative media matters if you're into that world.
Well, that's fantastic, and I think that's, you know, finding a neutral ground is exactly what Americans do. Is it a successful endeavor? Do you think? Let me ask you an interesting question. I want to see what you respond. Is the internet a centralization of news, or is it a decentralization of news? What's your thought on that?
Well, I guess it depends on the definition of that word. I mean, it is certainly there is some decentralization going on, but I mean, kind of. I mean, you know, 3 years ago, I would have said that Facebook is a fair platform, or
right?
Twitter
okay, yeah,
is an even-handed platform, and that's certainly radically changed around a lot. So, while it's decentralized to a large degree, and I think that brings good things and bad things, that it is. You know, it makes it difficult. Look, I had a liberal friend up here who's just, you know, a lot of them are starting to just kind of, as things kind of go crazy, they just get a little peek behind the curtain. They're like, I've read the New York Times every day of my life. I've always kind of assumed it was fair, and it was real, and it was all this. And then they just start, you know, start getting red pilled a little bit. They start seeing things that don't match up with reality. They're wondering why. You know, why are people in San Francisco pulling down Francis Scott Key statues and writing "Kill Whitey" on the bottom of the pedestal, and nobody seems to care? Why is that cool? Why is that? Why are we literally, you know, staying in San Francisco, a place where crime has been, you know, they discourage you from reporting a lot of crime because they just don't want to do the paperwork so much. And we now have like major politicians saying, let's defund police. So as I see some of those kind of things that appear radical to them, but are accepted, and just kind of the mainstream media, it brings up a disconnect in their life, and so some of them are scratching their head a little bit because they hate Trump, but they're looking around and saying, what the hell is going on? And they understand that they're not getting the straight scoop on stories, so they're like, who do I go to? And it's like, you know, I could tell them to check out Fox and a number of other sources, but when somebody comes up and asks them really like, hey, who do you go to for, you know, to get really both sides or get the whole thing? I mean, that's not an easy answer in life anymore. It used to be, but it just isn't, given the nature of how these news entities have changed. I mean, did you read Barry Weiss's resignation letter from the Times?
No. When was that? Was that today?
Barry Weiss it was yesterday, and it was just kind of a shocking and beautifully written and terribly sad piece. So she's a Democrat. She's a moderate Democrat, and she basically was forced out of the New York Times editorial board, talking about how kind of like Twitter and the radicalization has taken over that entity, and how everything that, I mean, you know, you saw it kind of burst into notion when the Tom Cotton editorial came in. You know, U.S. Senator writes something that the majority of Americans believe, hey, the police can't handle this, we should send in the military as a backstop to these riots breaking out in cities, you know, just like George Bush did in 1992. And that was the Times later took it down, said it didn't meet their editorial standards, and that literally it endangered the lives
Interesting.
say. I mean, it was a mainstreamish, conservative, but a mainstream opinion from a U.S. senator, and that is now, with their cancel culture, just like forbidden content. And these newsrooms have gotten radicalized. They really have, and we're starting to see the fallout from that.
So let's get into the COVID-19, and you already brought up the racial inequality movement, or rather, racial equality movement. And there's a couple different elements to this a couple different movements that have spawned from the health pandemic, and you've got sections of Portland, Oregon now. I think around the federal courthouse, CLAP, I think is the acronym. That they've sectioned off, Antifa being they. Seattle's dealing with something similar, but then the Black Lives Movement is something. How is it that these movements, in your opinion, in your view, how have these movements? Does it have to do with the unemployment rate? Does it have to do with schools closing? And Ken, in your view, how have these movements spawned from this health pandemic?
Sure. I do think there's a relationship with it. I mean, look, we've seen for decades, there has always been there's always been an anti-American movement within academia. All right, we've seen it in the 40s, the 50s. You might call it critical theory. It was Marxism at one point. It's all kind of wrapped around that type of stuff. I mean, you've seen that for a number of years, and kind of like a refined Marxism that's not just class versus class, but they've also created it up where they can make it race versus race, gender versus gender, and now you have 75 genders, so everybody can be aggrieved on that. We saw certainly over the last handful of years that whole cancel culture come out of the college campuses as well. Oh my God, Ben Shapiro's at UC Berkeley. Let's set fires to stop him from talking. Let's bring whistles. Let's bring drums into this. And that kind of whole if you can't beat them, shut them down. Heck, my daughter was at William and Mary, and they shouted down and wouldn't let an ACLU speaker speak because it was Black Lives Matter, and they had recently done something that wasn't Black Lives Matter enough for them. So you kind of always had these kind of grumpy groups out there. Black Lives Matter is a well-funded thing that most people don't kind of understand. That it's it's the slogan sounds great, but then you go look at their site and see what they actually want to accomplish, and you're like, holy crap. And then you listen to them talking about that they're trained Marxists, which is kind of a weird thing for young black people to say if they really want equality among blacks. And so you saw a combination of it was kind of a perfect storm of people been cooped up in their house and they were tired of doing stuff, and the only entertainment on some nights, because you couldn't go out to dinner, you couldn't go out to a movie, you couldn't go out to a nightclub or a bar. So combine the horrific video of a cop basically murdering a black guy in front of you, and you combine all of these other elements that were kind of there, always ready to go, always ready to jump on a freeway and do their stuff. I mean, a lot of kids have the black Antifa stuff in their closet up in Seattle and Oregon. It's always kind of been a hot spot of that. You combine it with tens of thousands of other people who are like, well, I'm not a racist, so I guess I'm for Black Lives Matter. And then with the more activists and getting out of the house, of course you went for 2 weeks where the media said, okay, there's no such thing as a pandemic anymore. Hey, go out there, kids, and do your stuff. And then, they rediscovered the pandemic pretty much the day after Trump announced that he was going to have a rally. And it came back to oh my gosh, how can you not have masks? And he's indoors and outdoors. I mean, look, everything is so politicized at that matter. I mean, you tell me who you're going to vote for, I'll tell you where you stand on chloroquine.
Sure.
I mean, could you imagine you could ever say that in America?
Right.
I'll tell you what you think about the efficacy of an anti-malarial drug on something if I know what your party is.
Right.
And I'd be 98% right.
And same with mask wearing, correct?
Yeah, I think there's probably a little bit more
Similar.
of an overlap of the mask wearing thing. But I mean, certainly that, anything Donald Trump, had he gone out with masks at the beginning and called for
Sure.
a longer clampdown, I can almost assure you that they'd be saying, well, locking people in homes with air conditioners, that's what's really spreading this. So Trump's killing people by having them staying locked in their homes. When he killed a terrorist and you see that terrorist, evil, bad guy who killed thousands and thousands of people, when you see, the Washington Post call him a revered, austere religious scholar. It's like, okay, whatever he does, the mainstream press will do the opposite, whether he's right or wrong.
Yeah, and this is an interesting phenomenon, really, and it sounds like it's created by this. Again, is it decentralized internet or is it more of a centralized issue? But let's get in. So Trump today, Trump today just overrides the CDC and says he wants state data being sent directly to the White House, and of course he's blocked out Fauci now for a number of weeks. What is causing that, do you think? And is there a relation to again this political divide as far as interpreting the actual health risk of the pandemic?
Yeah, to be honest, I haven't followed the latest CDC thing, so I really can't give you any insight onto that. I certainly know that the press from the day one was doing their best to drive a wedge between Fauci, who they decided to love, and Trump, who of course they hate. From the very first, if you recall, right before they had their first national press briefings, where they started going routinely, there was a report saying, well, Fauci can't talk to the press, and so they fell in love with him, and they were like, oh, he's the number one expert in the world, blah blah blah, and he was a pretty reasonable sounding guy out there, and he's also kind of on their side in the sense that, look, Fauci is one facet of what the president has to listen to when he looks at a response, right? He's the health guy. He is the guy who isn't worried. It's not under Fauci's warrior domain to say what's it doing to our economy or what's it going to do to a number of other things in America. So he's the guy to say let's keep these numbers down as low as possible. Just like firemen,
Sure.
They're not really worried about anything. They say, hey, my job is to stop fires, make everything in America non-flammable. And there was a little bit of a divide. You see some of the Republicans, when they were mad at something that Trump did, they couldn't get mad at Trump, so they blamed it on Fauci. Sometimes fairly, sometimes unfairly. Look, all of these guys have flipped on so many things. I could see this footage of Fauci saying, this is not
Right.
hit that hard, blah, 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 blah. And then that changed. And then I saw them saying, no, you shouldn't be wearing masks. It's only for people in hospitals, and don't worry about masks. And then a week later, 2 weeks later, you're a criminal if you don't wear a mask. So, all the politics. Nancy Pelosi was well after Trump had closed down flights from China, was bringing people through Chinatown in San Francisco, saying the restaurants are open, come on in. So they've all spun around on them. And what we all as Americans have done is we picked our team, and whatever our team is like, they were the smartest ones, and the other guys were the idiots. And we're seeing that replayed 320 million times in America.
Yeah, let's hope things remain diplomatic. How do Americans move forward in this as if they allow themselves to feed into the divide that is, as you mentioned, the mainstream media via, for instance, Fox News or CNN, which seem to be clearly divided politically. We can throw in MSNBC. How do Americans draw to you and draw to sources, i.e., like yours, and say, "Hey, this is a neutral ground reporting"? How do you distinguish yourself from others and assure them that the information you're giving them is indeed that neutral ground?
Yeah, well, I've split away from that neutral model. I couldn't make that work. I was going to go
Okay.
more house with that. So I have split more of conservative, and with the Media Action Network, it's 100% kind of conservative pushing it. But the broader question is, who do you trust?
Sure.
And that's difficult because so I think a lot of it is the way that that people need to pay more attention than they would have had to in the past. It's just It's not as simple as picking up your newspaper and thinking you're getting a balanced view of America. I mean, it used to be really not that long ago. I mean, really just not that long ago. And so, it makes the consumption of news, which is now ubiquitous, it's everywhere, but it makes it up to the consumer a little bit. It's more important for them to understand, okay, what's the spin that here's Epic Times. What's their spin on things? What might they be missing out of this? Here's the New York Times. Am I really getting, there's a lot of, it's the longest article. They're smartly written. What might I not be getting? And I don't believe you can. But there's no, if you said, hey, there's one source to go to, you get to choose one source and find out what's going on in America. I don't know if I could name any of them that's one single source. You now, as a consumer, now the good news is, look, 10 years ago, to get a Chicago Tribune, I'd have to fly to Chicago or to go to some specialty newspaper stand down in LA Times, and now it takes 3 seconds to type in Chicago Tribune and see what they're reporting on. So while everything's getting more biased and you kind of have to get multiple outlets, finding multiple outlets is trivially easy, but people have to go through that effort.
Right. Yeah. Well said. It's an unprecedented time. We're facing some definite challenges as Americans, and agreeing to unite under differences is perhaps what is best needed. I personally can say, hey, look, we've inherited a constitution that has brought together more ethnicities, more religions, more people of more backgrounds than any country ever has in the history of humanity. At least that's the way I look at it. And so, we've got a Supreme Court that interprets that for us. But the more we can stay close to those innate human rights and values and constitutional values, I think the best for us, or whether it's liberal or conservative, look past those political divides. Ken, thanks for joining the program today. For listeners, leave some closing, if you would, some closing remarks, some closing thoughts.
Well, I'm glad you kind of talked into that constitutional issue, and in both America's still a pretty darn good place. I mean, first of all, there aren't a whole lot of countries that actually have to worry about building a fence to keep people out. Right? I mean, I've been in countries before where they had triple net barbed wire to keep people from leaving their country, and it was Russia. In fact, that was called the Soviet Union, and some other scary places. But the one thing that is a creeping thing that I think we all need to also just be aware of, because you talked about the values that we were built on, and the First Amendment's a very important one, and the concept of more speech is what trumps bad speech, and the one out of all of these things that are going on right now, COVID, and people pulling down statues and being idiots and running around with their hair on fire, all of that stuff, they all to me kind of pale as a threat in comparison to the First Amendment and the concept of free speech, because societies that have successfully said no, that whole concept of thinking that way is now forbidden.
Right.
They always turn bad. I mean, look, you can have one Fox News on the cable channel, and it's like, okay, if they're conservative and the other guys are liberal, people can find that if it's an imbalance. But when they get to the point where it's like, you can't think that, and we're taking you off of Facebook or our town square,
exactly,
or we're scaring you into not saying certain things that might be reasonable. That's when societies turn to crap. And that's the one thing that we all have to be, I think, acutely aware of and ready to fight for.
Okay, well said. Thank you, Ken. Ladies and gentlemen, Ken LaCorte. Website again for your website again, Ken?
Website is LaCorte News is now a conservative leaning site out there, but if you're somebody who really kind of wants to push back against the liberal media, it's MediaActionNetwork.com.
Look forward to keeping in touch with you, Ken. Thank you very much.
Terrific. Thank you.
Ken LaCorte, folks. And looks like, let's see. So I am trying out a couple different things. Of course, to start this broadcast, I I had that interference. So thanks for putting up with that. We're very fortunate to have received Ken onto the program. I think my own personal closing thoughts are just that. We've got to. If you're listening to this, there seems to be there's so much push to divide Americans. This is my perspective. Okay, it's just me looking out, and seeing what's going on around the country. And I've been to most parts of this land. I've been to most. There's not many states that I have not been to. And to see what's happening right now, really disgusts me. But it is happening, and we must agree to disagree, folks. Right? We must come to a neutral ground, and like Ken said, we must remember that we are still living in the greatest country on the planet. Now, you might disagree with me if you're listening to this in the UK or Canada, England, I mean, Scotland, or Costa Rica, or wherever you may be living. You may be disagreeing with me, but I'll stand by that because I'm in the U.S. And so we must unite on the fact that, yes, we have built a great nation. And there are aspects of it that anybody living today wishes didn't happen, okay, i.e. slavery. The United States is not the only country that had slaves. In fact, there are many countries today that have slavery, okay? Child trafficking is happening. That's a form of slavery. So get past, I think, what happened and take advantage of what's been created thanks to people like Martin Luther King Jr. So look past the political divides, I think, is my, if you're liberal, you're conservative, I think both parties have elements of both of those ethics, if you will, moral values. But it seems to be that the politics are simply dividing, and the media is taking advantage of that to make money. So this is what I urge. I urge you to go to Catherine Austin Fitts, Google Catherine Austin Fitts, because, and the reason I'm directing you to this today in this episode is because I haven't heard anybody sum it up better than her. She brings in the World Economic Forum that meets yearly at Jackson Hole. She brings in her opinions on the Federal Reserve Bank, which is a central bank that controls the U.S. government and its military, and therefore its media. That's my opinion. Prove me wrong, please. I wish you do. And then she brings in the technological advances. She threads in human microchipping, brain implants, and how does that coordinate with 5G, the 5G advancements of the 5G network, and therefore incoming 6G, and how that equates to the economy. What she argues is that the U.S. dollar will likely crash in the future, and those controlling the central bank that I believe feed into a European-based central banking system will then push for a digitized currency. I leave it at that. Catherine Austin Fitts, Wharton grad and Yale grad. And until next week, folks, I thank you for listening. This has been another Discussion of Truth. I'm Ian Hamilton Trottier, iantrottier.com. That's Trottier. And folks, until then, be awesome.